On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, Happy New Year's. So let's break down the top 10 things we're most grateful for from the Diamondbacks 2023 season.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm your host of this wonderful podcast, Miller Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, MillerThomas24.myportfolio.com, to see all of my latest work. And thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. So please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But for today's podcast, I want to break down the top 10 things we're grateful for from the Diamondbacks 2023 season because, of course, it's New Year's Day. So why not do a little New Year's episode on today's Locked on D-Backs podcast? Feeling a little bit under the weather, but we're going to power through and give you guys a good show today. So let's just jump right into it. I didn't do like a straight power ranking. It's kind of in order, but not really. You guys can really mess with the order any way you want. But I just wrote down the 10 things I felt like were calling to me the most, the things that made me happiest when I look back on this season, this magical season that the D-backs just had. Because the first thing that I want to discuss, I was most grateful for from the 2023 season was, of course, the World Series appearance. It's the first thing I'm going to remember and think about when I think about this past year from the D-backs. I'm not going to think about heartbreak and the D-backs not getting the job done in the end. Really, like in the moment, right after the World Series, those next few days, that week after, I was sad. I was a little bit down in the dumps, but now a couple months removed from it, like all I think about from this past year is nothing but happiness, joy, exceeding expectations, going on a magical run. Like the World Series postseason experience was so much fun because against the Milwaukee Brewers, you're like, okay, the D-backs have a chance in this series. They could definitely take down the Brew Crew, but it's a coin toss. It's a 50-50 flip, and the D-backs handle business against the Brew Crew. Then they played against the LA Dodgers, who everyone, including us D-backs fans, were like, we're going to get the floor mopped with us. You know, if we're lucky, we win one game against LA. And how did the series start? With the worst start in Kershaw's playoff career. And that is a big accomplishment because he has a lot of terrible starts under his belt. But to get Kershaw and then to sweep the LA Dodgers and hold Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman to just one hit in the series. You have that game at home where you have 4 home runs in one inning. Never been done in postseason history before. Like the D-backs through the first 2 rounds of the postseason, already historic. Then you go against the Philadelphia Phillies, that vaulted offense with the Schwarbers and the Harpers who are just hitting home runs to start the game. You're like, should we even pitch to those guys the rest of the series? You go down 3-2. You're like, can the D-backs win back-to-back games in Philadelphia? No, because no one in baseball can win back-to-back playoff games in Philadelphia. And what did the D-backs do? They went into Philadelphia and they stole, not steal, they earned those 2 victories in Philadelphia. You had that big Alec Thomas game-tying home run at home. I was there. I think that was like game 4. I was at that game. Magical. That whole D-backs run up until the World Series was magical, historic, fun, whatever adjective you want to use. Then, of course, you get to the World Series. You don't finish the job, but you still had great moments like the game 2, the Merrill Kelly spectacular. You had Zach Allen throw like no hit, through like 6 no-hit innings in the final game of the World Series. Like overall, great postseason run. And when I think about the 2023 season, the first thing I'm going to think about is that phenomenal World Series appearance. Number two that I have written down, again, not a straight power ranking. Number two is just Corbin Carroll. The Corbin Carroll experience. Everyone said this dude was going to be a stud. Everyone was like, okay, this might be a can't miss prospect. Maybe not, might be. This was a can't miss prospect. This was going to be a dude. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of prospects who come up as can't miss guys. Juraxen Profar was a 5-tool can't miss guy. And now he's still around the game, but he's not the superstar that we thought he was going to be. There's a lot of prospects like that. I think even the Colorado Rockies, Brendan Rodgers, wasn't he like a can't miss guy at one point? You just never know with prospects. And Corbin Carroll, we got a taste of it last year, 2022, to end the year. And we were like, okay, Corbin Carroll, this guy looks pretty good. He had pretty good numbers in the small sample size in 2022. 830 OPS, 4 home runs, a couple stolen bases in 32 games. You got a nice little sampler, a nice little appetizer, a nice little tease from Corbin Carroll in 2022. But we're like, can we see the full thing? What will he look like over the course of a 162 game season? And my God, Corbin Carroll did not disappoint at all in his rookie season. Only rookie ever, 25 home runs, 50 plus stolen bases, had a 868 OPS. He led the league in triples. He finished 5th in MVP voting, unanimous rookie of the year, first team all MLB over guys like Aaron Judge. Like, Corbin Carroll had himself a season, and now you can make the real argument. Corbin Carroll, one of the faces of Major League Baseball, especially being on a team that got to the World Series in his rookie year. And Corbin Carroll was putting in work in the postseason. He slowed down a little bit once we got to the World Series and the Championship Series, but he did do well in Game 6 and Game 7 of that Championship Series against Philadelphia, and definitely was arguably the best or second best player through the first 2 rounds of the postseason for the D-backs. So Corbin Carroll, as a rookie, really showed up in a big way in the postseason, showed up in a major way in the regular season, and now the D-backs have a locked in foundational piece on one of the best contracts in Major League Baseball. The D-backs gave him an unprecedented deal before the season started, and now it looks like it's going to be one of the smartest moves, one of the smartest contracts ever handed out to a player. I'm so grateful for Corbin Carroll, and he's not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. Then the final thing that I'm grateful for in segment number 1 is that Dalton Varsho trade, because don't get me wrong, trading Dalton Varsho in the moment, it hurt a lot because of the outfielders. We all felt Corbin Carroll was probably going to be the best, but Dalton Varsho at that point was the dude who showed the most. Dalton Varsho, his final season with the D-backs, maybe it wasn't elite, but you're like, he's 25 years old and he's still on the rise, coming off a season where he had 27 home runs, 16 stolen bases, almost 75 ribbies, and was absolutely the best defensive outfielder in the sport. At, again, only 25 years old, you're like, what's the ceiling for Dalton Varsho? If he's already putting up, got the home runs, got some speed, got the defense, if we can get the actual contact ability up, maybe he could become more of a run producer as well. Like, Dalton Varsho has a chance to be legitimately one of the best players in the sport. That's what his ceiling can be. But then he gets traded to Toronto and just has himself a really down season offensively. Still, the defensive metrics will tell you Dalton Varsho is probably the best defensive outfielder in the sport. But offensively, took a major step back with the Blue Jays this year. And then on the other side, the D-backs get back Gabriel Moreno, who was a fantastic first full year in the big leagues for Gabriel Moreno, and looked really comfortable. I mean, 284 average at the plate, arguably the best defensive catcher in the sport. I mean, he led the league in throwing out base stealers. He did win the Gold Glove, I'm pretty sure, for the catcher position this past year. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you guys will do that in the comments. And just defensively, the metrics love Gabriel Moreno defensively, and his offensive ability, I think, has another level to tap into as well. Already a good contact hitter. And in the postseason, did get bumped up to number 3 in the lineup because that's how good of an offensive player Gabriel Moreno can be. Plus, you throw in Lourdes Gurriel, who was a pending free agent in the deal. He was only on a 1-year contract when the D-backs acquired him, and he was coming off a season where he had his lowest power output in his career. 5 home runs in just 121 games that final season in Toronto. Excuse me. He comes over to the D-backs, and the first 2 months tears the cover off the ball, falls off, of course, in the second half of the season, but still, overall, the full year from Lourdes Gurriel, he hit 24 home runs, over 80 RBIs, and he was a pretty good postseason performer as well for the D-backs this past year. So and the fact that you did re-sign him. So you get back this young catcher of the future in Gabriel Moreno, and you get back a dude that could be your left fielder for, 4 seasons overall. Like, that's a great haul for a guy who, yes, Dalton Varsho might be the best defensive outfielder in the sport, but offensively, he still has a lot of strides to make in his game. So that deal by Mike Hazen, probably the best trade of anybody pulled off last year. I think that's a real argument you can make. It was the best trade that any GM pulled off last year. I think Kim of the Miami Marlins, the trade she pulled off at the deadline were comparable. But I think if you look at a singular trade to get back 2 high-level major leaguers that help you get to the World Series for just one really good defensive player, I think the D-backs had the best trade in Major League Baseball with that Dalton Varsho trade last year, and it is one of the things that I'm most grateful for. Now we got the catcher of the future, Gabriel Moreno, and the left fielder for at least the next few seasons, and Lourdes Gurriel. Now I got a couple more things that I'm grateful for from the Diamondbacks 2023 season. But one other thing that I'm grateful for is FanDuel Sportsbook, because if you want to place a futures bet on the D-backs winning the World Series in 2024, there's no better place to do that than FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's it. Just $5. That's $150 in bonus bets. Win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live game, same game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best ways to find popular parlays, and more. My favorite thing to do actually is the same game parlay, because whenever the Lakers are playing like a 500 team or worse, I take AD over in points, AD over in rebounds, and the Lakers money line. Now that money line, that third leg of the parlay, that one a little bit more rough to hit in the recent couple weeks since the in-season tournament, but that's still my go-to parlay to play. So if you want to do the same thing as me, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. If you like the show, follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks on both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now, let's get back to the show and discuss some more things that we're grateful for from the Diamondbacks 2023 season. Once again, Happy New Year's to anyone listening, whether you're listening on New Year's Day or a few days after. So, next thing up on my list. This one maybe doesn't seem as positive on the face, but it was something that was very important to the D-backs getting to the World Series. Cutting dead weight off the roster. I was very happy to see the D-backs play with a sense of urgency this year and make moves with a sense of urgency this year. Because if you guys remember, because I know you do, at the start of the year, we had a man named Madison Bumgarner in the rotation. And my God, was he awful, because just in 16 innings pitched, 4 starts, 10.26 ERA, 19 earned runs, 4 home runs, 15 walks. He had a 2.4 whip and was just horrendous. I mean, the Madison Bumgarner experience in totality, absolutely horrendous. I think Madison Bumgarner, he will be on the Hall of Fame ballot when his career is over. He has had a career that can be in the Hall of Fame, but you have to just wipe away your memory of what he did in Arizona because the last 4 years, like just his first 10 years of his career, you can make the argument that's a Hall of Fame career. But honestly, his time in Arizona might hurt his candidacy just a little bit because he had a 5.23 ERA over the course of 363 innings pitched with the D-backs. Really disgusting. But he wasn't the only guy cut from the D-backs this past year. I love the fact that they moved on from Zach Davies and the Nick Ahmeds of the world, and they put Pavin Smith back in AAA, and they kind of did the same thing with the outfield. They were like, if you're not playing well, Jake McCarthy or Alec Thomas, you're going down to AAA, and we're calling up someone with a hot hand. I just love the fact that the D-backs were not afraid to cut somebody off the roster, whether you're a big name marquee player in the sport like a Madison Bumgarner, despite being in the decline and not where it used to be, you're still one of the most respected pitchers in baseball. But the D-backs had to move on from Madison Bumgarner because he was no longer a quality pitcher. And a guy like Nick Ahmed, he's at the top of the leaderboard for a lot of D-back stats in their franchise history. But for being honest, Nick Ahmed was never that guy in his career. And what he did this past season, it's like he offers you nothing offensively. Defensively, he's still good, but not enough to make up for his lack of offensive contribution. And then you had Perdomo being the best clutch hitter in the sport, giving you the same level of defense as Nick Ahmed. You had to ride with Perdomo. You had to move off of Nick Ahmed. Plus, you had a guy like Jordan Lawler not too far away. Sad to see Ahmed go, but I love the fact that D-backs did not give a damn about feelings this past year. They were like, we're playing the best players at all times. And I love the fact that they did that because that's what you're supposed to do. Don't waste windows. You have this core of players that you saw could win games and be good. Once the D-backs start off to that hot start, the first half of the season where they were tied for the NL West lead, they were like, you know what? We gotta maximize this roster the best way we can. And one of the ways we could do that is cutting the dead weight. So I'm very grateful for the Arizona Diamondbacks for taking that approach. Number 2 on my list, for segment number 2 at least, is the Ketel Marte bounce back experience. Because Marte, I think, is in the conversation for one of the best second basemen in the sport. Is he the best? Probably not right now. You would probably say Simeon and Altuve and Albies are ahead of him right now. But when Marte is right, he's at least in the conversation for the best because back in 2019, some time away now, we are a few years removed from 2019, but Marte in 2019 still finished 4th in MVP voting. Not going to go through his whole numbers. You guys know the stats, but elite in 2019. 2020, down year, was a COVID shortened season. 2021, I think if he played a full season, could have looked like the best second baseman in baseball once again. But because of injuries, only played 90 games in 2021, but did look elite when he did play. And then 2022, I don't know what happened last year. Ketel Marte was just not the same guy. The average was a career low. The OPS was a 727. He only had 12 home runs in 137 games, only 52 RBIs. And then 2023, major bounce back for Marte. The power's back, 25 home runs, back to being a middle of the order producer as well from an RBI standpoint. Over 800 OPS. Marte looked like an all-star once again in 2023. And if you get Ketel Marte, the all-star, with the Corbin Carrolls and the Christian Walkers and now Eugenio Suarez and hopefully a JD Martinez, like if Ketel Marte is back to at least, he doesn't have to be the best second baseman, but he has to at least be in the conversation. And that's what he was this past year. We get this Marte again next year, the D-backs offense will be humming once again because we saw what Marte did in the postseason, right? I think he had a hit in every game of his career until like that last World Series game or something like that. Like I'll have to pull up the numbers exactly. Like his first like 50 postseason games, like his first 20 postseason games, Marte had a base hit, which is insane. His career postseason numbers, Ketel Marte, 344 average, 974 OPS in his postseason career over the course of 21 games. Ketel Marte, a freak of nature, and every Arizona Diamondbacks fan loves him, and I hope he continues his resurgence in 2024. Then the final thing that I want to talk about in segment number 3 that I was really grateful for from the D-backs in 2023 was the Geraldo Perdomo breakout. Geraldo Perdomo turned to an all-star was not something I had on my bingo card entering 2023 because Perdomo, to be honest, entering this past year, I just thought was like a nothing player, just someone to fill the gap until we get to Jordan Lawler, just be the bridge, just be decent enough to get us to Lawler. And honestly, Perdomo might have himself, a little career here. Perdomo might actually be good enough to be an everyday shortstop if he continues to improve because the final numbers for Perdomo don't look the prettiest. 246 average, 712 OPS, but then you watch Perdomo, very good defensive player. I think maybe the best person at taking pitches on the team. Like, I don't know if there's a guy on the team with a better batter's eye than a Perdomo. And honestly, based off the metrics of what he did with runners in scoring position, the clutchest player on the Z-backs team this past year, Perdomo in the clutch, elite for the D-backs this past season, came through constantly, actually led the team with runners in scoring position, batting average, 313 average with a 948 OPS, absolutely clutch in the first half of the season. Played to an all-star level, 271 average, 787 OPS. Fell off in a big way in the second half, but what he was able to do in the bottom of the order, getting on base, sacrifice hits, I thought Perdomo was really important and really valuable to this D-backs team this past year. And if he can continue to improve as an offensive player, Jordan Lawler might be waiting in the wings for another season or two. Now we got a couple more things I want to discuss that I was really grateful for from the 2023 season. But one thing that I am grateful for is the fact that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's wrap up the pod by talking about a few more things that we're grateful for from this past D-back season. And the next thing that I want to discuss is just the front line duo for the D-backs because Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly were nails all regular season. I mean, of course, the second half of Zach Gallen fell off a little bit, but still, Cy Young award winner, I think, for 70% of the season. Definitely fell off a little bit, but still, Cy Young finalist, finished top 3 in the voting. Merrill Kelly, one of the most underrated pitchers in baseball, still a stud. Fantastic this past regular season, then only turned it up a notch in the postseason. What Merrill Kelly did in the playoffs, I think, is going to raise his stock in clout in Major League Baseball by a lot because Kelly, first year in the playoffs, 2.25 ERA, 4 starts, 24 innings pitched, only 6 earned runs. And what he did on the World Series stage against that Texas Rangers team, 7 hits, 7 innings, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 9 strikeouts against the Rangers in game 2. He looked dominant. Zach Gallen in the World Series, he showed up in a big way because the D-backs desperately needed a good Zach Gallen start to keep that series alive, and they got the best start from Zach Gallen all postseason with his back against the wall. Gallen stepped up in a major way, and that duo of Gallen and Kelly, arguably the best duo in Major League Baseball. It's on the short list. When you think of, I mean, the Dodgers are probably going to have one of the best duos. The Braves are always going to be in the conversation. Maybe the Yankees, if Garrett Cole and whoever with them can get more improved going to next year. So there's a bunch of teams that have a argument against Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, but when you really look at the numbers, you could say that's a top 5 duo in Major League Baseball, and they're going to be a top 5 duo once again in 2024. How about this one? The playoff bullpen. I mean, the bullpen was phenomenal for the D-backs in the postseason this past year because the bullpen has been the biggest issue for the D-backs. The last few years, the bullpen has been absolutely horrendous, especially the closing situation for the D-backs. And what they were able to do, I mean, at one point, the bullpen was absolutely shut down, not giving up any earned runs. They started to falter a little bit as the postseason went on, but the quartet of Ryan Thompson, Sal Frank, Ginkel, and Seawald, absolutely phenomenal, especially Seawald and Ginkel. I mean, those two were absolutely nails. You were like, if you could just get to the seventh inning, this game was going to be over because you could bring out Ginkel in the seventh, and that could get you all the way to Seawald, who could come out, late in the eighth. Like you could do a whole bunch of things with the way those two were pitching. Seawald was able to get got in the World Series, but he was going against a former ALS foe, the Texas Rangers. So I think that makes sense. But what he was able to do against the National League, those two guys, Ginkel and Seawald, were absolutely crazy in the postseason with the level that they were at, the way that they were pitching. I mean, neither guy gave up an earned run through the first 3 rounds. I don't think Ginkel ever gave up an earned run in the postseason. Those guys were insanely good in the postseason up until the World Series. And so was Thompson, and so was Sal Frank as well. Maybe Sal Frank not as good as Ryan Thompson, but I thought both of them, when one guy faltered, the other guy would pick him up in certain situations in the postseason. So I loved that quartet in the playoffs, and I thought that quartet was a major reason why the D-backs were able to get to the postseason because the pitching, we all love the front line, of course, of Gallen and Kelly, but we all thought the bullpen could be the reason that holds back this D-backs team. We thought it was fine throughout the regular season, but definitely not stacking up against some of those other playoff bullpens. And little did we know they were going to go on a magical run and be absolutely nails through the first 3 rounds of the postseason. So shout out D-backs playoff bullpen in 2023. And how about playoff Fott next up on my list? Because Gallen really struggled in the second half, and he even struggled to start the postseason as well. And the D-backs, it was like, if Gallen's going to struggle, we know Merrill Kelly's going to be a stud, but there's no one we trust in the rotation after that, considering the regular season we saw from Brandon Pfaadt. And Pfaadt ended up just looking like a completely different pitcher in the postseason. All of a sudden, this was a guy that could go deep into ball games. All of a sudden, this was a guy that can rack up the strikeouts and not give up the home runs. He completely flipped the script on the kind of pitcher he was when he got to the postseason. He seemed to just be unbothered. Like, it didn't look like he had any nerves. The way he was walking around the stadium in the pre-games and talking to people, like the way Brandon Pfaadt carried himself with just like this, it was confidence, but it wasn't like an arrogance. It was just like, I'm supposed to be here and I'm not afraid of anyone. And I think Fought, the emotions he displayed in the postseason, the confidence that he showed D-backs fans, I think we all really feel good about Brandon Pfaadt as our number 4 starter going to the regular season next year, with Erod coming in to be the number 3. Pfaadt as the number 4 could be potentially one of the best number 4 starters in the sport next year. And maybe his talent's so good that he's even better than a number 4. Maybe he slotted in as a number 4 in the rotation, but he looks like a number 2 in terms of his talent, with the way he can pitch, with the way he can strike out people. So very excited to see a full season of Brandon Pfaadt next year. Then the final thing that I was grateful for from the 2023 season to wrap up the pod is those Torey Lovullo playoff pressers calling out Mad Dog, calling out the media, even the times when he was crying when the D-backs lost the World Series. I love to see the happiness, the aggression, the sadness, and just the full range of emotions for Torey Lovullo. That's the kind of manager I would want to play for. We've had some disputes on the X's and O's, sometimes on the field, but off the field, Torey Lovullo has done a great job with his team. I think the team really responds to him. I think they respect him a lot. And I'm very grateful that Torey Lovullo and Mike Hazen are the leaders of this Diamondbacks squad. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. It's New Year's, so go hug your loved ones if you haven't done so already. I'll see you guys. It's 2024. Let's go have ourselves a fantastic 2024 year. Let's see the D-backs prosper once again. And let's see the D-backs get the job done and win the World Series this year. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back later in the week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.